So apparently there's something like 2 to 7 million pieces of information that could be perceived at any one time. So if you think about when you're looking around, it's not just the kind of general things you see, like buildings or shops or things on the floor. I think it's more about the properties of the things, the colors, the size, the dimensions. I think that's what it's meaning about, it's up to 7 million pieces of information or more or less. But if you think, what about the things that we can't perceive? Because presumably they're all the things that you can sense, so they're all the things that you could perceive. It's the thing that you could look at and say, that is this, that. That's what that would mean. But the things that you can't see, how many, like what is the potential? The potential would be what, 7 million again? You have to say if there's a potential to see 7 million things that you can perceive, things that you can't perceive, we would say about 7 million as well. It's quite a balanced guess, right? But obviously it's something that you could never observe because you can't perceive it. Well, I say you can't perceive it, but it must be perceivable at some point. Otherwise, why would it exist? So it can be perceived and it can't be perceived. These are things like, I'd refer to them as like the phenomena, the spiritual phenomena or paranormal, because they're the things that some people see sometimes. So there's things that can sometimes be perceived. So like it's not always there, but it is possible. So I think that's an important point to make, that if something is perceivable, it's also not. So even though there's all this information, how much do people actually perceive at any one time? Probably only a small fraction of that. So what is the point? Well, if there are things that aren't always seen or perceived, or can't always be, it's not to say that it isn't possible or it doesn't exist. It's just to say that for whatever reason, the conditions, whether it's the person or whether it's the kind of general environment, are not conducive to that thing being perceived in a human way. In terms of paranormal type experiences, I did have significant experience when I was younger. And I know people that have had experiences in their adult life. All I can say is that it's possible and it's also not possible. I observed something, I perceived something, and at that point they were possible. So is it? Maybe we have to be in like a certain condition in order to perceive. Maybe the senses that we have can perceive those things. I've always kind of said, well, can't perceive those things because our senses don't allow it. That obviously can't be true because things I've seen and heard were perceived with my senses. So the only thing that could have changed was the condition. The senses don't change. It's the way in which the information that is being taken in is processed and perceived and filtered. That can change. It's interesting when you think about it in that way, that the potential is always there. It's just whether the body is in a condition to perceive it, to be able to decode that information, whether the body is in a condition to receive that information. Because if you think we spend the majority of our time in physical material. Everything's quite heavy, right? Everything's got a charge, got matter. And the thing that you typically associate with being paranormal, spiritual, has the appearance of no weight, no matter, doesn't look heavy. Looks the opposite. So maybe that is kind of showing the expression of balance in that way. That the fundamental elements of what we are, both heavy, so matter, physical, light, but also the thing that is not heavy, the thing that is not matter, that is light. If anything, paranormal, spiritual may be associated with darkness or occult, hidden, the secret. That's what people would typically think, right? That it's quite a dark thing to think about. Maybe not so much the spirituality side, because that has become associated with different things, not just experiences like that. Like not paranormal experiences, but more like yoga and mindfulness, which are not necessarily a cult, but are more uplifting and light. So maybe that's a better way to view it. The heavy and light element. The heavy being the physical body, the light being the spiritual, the not always perceivable lighter nature of things, the spirit. And like I said, I think it's based on conditions as to whether you can perceive the differences between the two. If you imagine the spirit is holding things up, is pulling things towards a higher nature, whereas physicality is pulling things down, matter is pulling things down. So you've got these two forces that are acting against each other, but acting to keep equilibrium. Let's say if any one of them kind of fell, what happens? The spirit rises, the body falls. Say they see when they have a near-death experience, right? They rose out of the body and they turned and saw themselves on a operating table or something. And then typically the heart stops.
Okay.
That would be a near-death experience. Heart stops, but the heart was able to be started again. The heart stops and can't be started, then that's death. I guess generally speaking, it is about health or being alive or being dead. That's kind of the overarching theme, right? That in order for everything else to be happening to you or in your life, there has to be life and death. So you got those two forces pulling apart, and in order to keep equilibrium, there has to be balance. So if it goes too far in any one direction, then it's going to result in the same thing. It's like if somebody started smoking at 18, the chance that they would just keel over and die of lung cancer at 21 would be minimal. Or the potential of it would be low, because if you look at the way things are balanced, they're young, assuming they're healthy, no other types of conditions. So the body should be able to keep up in providing balance against the thing that they're doing. Because the body is resilient, it can take so much. Now, if you compare that to somebody maybe at 70 years old started smoking, it may not be such a good thing for the body because you're introducing something else that the body has to deal with. And so it adds greater resistance than it would have to the person at 18 years old, because the body is able to keep up with it. But the older you get, the body kind of degrades in its ability to be able to recover from things like that. Because the smoke is carcinogenic, it's constantly attacking the body every time. So something that the body has to deal with. Yeah, I guess The person at 70 and the person at 18 are going to have different viewpoints. The person at 17 may not care because they've lived their life. So they may think, well, this is me. This is it for me. I'm going to enjoy this. Speeding up the inevitable almost, because the body's being put under heavier resistance, meaning things are going to happen a bit quicker, move quicker towards it. Whereas someone at 18, if they have a realization, well, this could actually kill me at some point, then they're more likely to stop at some point. So it's a perspective. And it's also the position that you are in, that kind of bigger cycle of things, bigger cycle being life. 18 years old, you've got the rest of your life ahead of you. 70 years old, you might just be thankful just to wake up tomorrow or something. That sounds a bit morbid, but things get a little bit heavier and more resistant as you get older. Things get a bit heavier, you can't really walk so good, can't really move so good. The people that I see is, like 70 years old or more, they tend to be not as quick on their feet as they used to be. But obviously that's not going to be true in all cases. Maybe they put less things in the body that's caused, or they put less things in the body that would typically cause those kinds of things. I think it's entirely under the control of the person to a degree. Maybe genetically, the core makeup of the person may be flawed in a way in which certain things are placed as resistors, that they have additional things that they can't do or that they shouldn't do. I was reading last night, I was looking at a periodic table. Specifically, I was looking for plutonium, the characteristics and history of it. And I didn't know that it was derived from, I think it's uranium, bombarding certain elements together in order to create something different. What's interesting is some of the things that they create, like americinium or beryllium. It's after americinium in the chart. These elements were all created around the same time. They weren't discovered, they were created. Now something like americinium, plutonium, created by bombarding things together. And I think it was, this all happened around the 1940s. It was about World War II. And the weird thing is that the way in which they produce it is by bombarding these elements together, and they get like a minimal amount produced. In terms of grams, it's like something like a millionth of a gram. It was such a small measure that they couldn't even see it. It was invisible. So they were producing something that was not physically visible. And then they said it took several years in order to create something like a few kilograms. It must obviously be perceived in some way because they measured it. But they continued to work with this process to create more. This large amount of energy to create such a small amount of something. It's all very strange. But curious that they were talking about it in a way that it was invisible, and then it was visible when they made enough. When it had enough mass, it became visible. Yeah, the thing I really wanted to kind of touch on was this difference between two worlds coexisting at the same time, the spiritual and the physical. So I've had several experiences that I cannot physically explain because it shouldn't physically be possible, but it could be described as a process in non-physicality, like thought or visualization. But the reason that makes it so much more than kind of beyond that visualization or beyond thought or beyond belief is that I was having a disagreement with my partner the other day. It wasn't all intense or anything. It was quite calm. And basically just saying, I thought that this was happening. No, that isn't what was planned. And then almost like clicking your fingers straight after that, I was having an out-of-body experience. I had at least one before, several years ago when I was meditating. It was actually the first time I meditated. And I couldn't hold it during that time because it was kind of a new sensation. It was a little bit scary that you were kind of losing control of the body. Because essentially I was looking at my own body and I wasn't asleep. I wasn't dead. But I think my body was just in a state of maybe enabling that kind of experience. So I ended up, during that first experience, I kind of freaked out. I was like, I don't really know what is going to happen. So my mind started to kind of race back. And then I felt I was back in my body. But I was seeing myself sitting in the chair. I was seeing myself from a different perspective. Now, when I was having a disagreement with my partner a few days ago, it was the same thing, but this was a weird angle on it. I was looking like from where the light fixture was, looking down. So I was looking down on myself and my partner as we were still talking. So there's no kind of rising feeling. There was nothing. It was literally click your fingers and it's gone. Like you're out of your body.
Okay.
And I just remember I had no control of my body or what was being said or anything. It was, is this really happening? I can't do anything. And it was also kind of a realization of the separation that it was just like gone, like just like that. And it was almost like watching, I hate to say it, but it was like watching a script play out. So it was like, no matter what I tried to say or do in terms of like, did I intervene or did I want to intervene? It wasn't really an option. It's like when you play a point and click video game, like an adventure game, and it's like you have very limited options. You can look at things, but you can't do anything with it. You can talk to people, but you can only say a specifically defined thing. And then after the first part of the disagreement, then I was back in control. But I remember thinking, what do I do now? Because I'd heard what I'd said. And it was something I knew. Why did I say that? Because it was fueling an argument at that point. It was no longer a disagreement. That was really weird. And just that feeling of like, okay, now you're back in your body and feeling helpless. Like being put in a situation, okay, now deal with it. It was so weird. And I tried to think, okay, logically, how could this happen? Physically, how could I see myself and my partner from that perspective? So you're shown the truth and then you deal with it. Do you lie about what you said or do you take responsibility for it? It felt like a test. I didn't feel there was any intention of what I was saying, but it was something that I recognized had been behavior that was learned in childhood. Using emotion in order to try and get something. At the same time, I had the out of body. My wife had an out of body experience. And the way she was talking, she saw the same thing as me. No, I've not told her about my experience. So I wanted to see if she had more information about what she experienced. So this is why I mentioned the 7 millionth piece of information that you can perceive, and my kind of postulating that, okay, well, maybe there's 7 million pieces that you can't always perceive. But the reason why I mention the things that we don't perceive is because what happened yesterday could potentially be something like that. The conditions that we were both in some way, maybe that was conducive to that experience. Now, I'm not entirely sure what those conditions would be, but because it was a shared experience, that's why I think it's some piece of information that is common, that we were perceiving the same thing. Not that we were somehow projecting out or something, but like I said, it was relatively calm at the point at which it happened. It was only after going back that things escalated. It was almost like, for what is about to be said, you're going to see it from this perspective, and then you're back in your body, and now you're going to deal with it. So in that respect, it felt like a video game. Like you were watching a screen, somebody being directed. These are the only things that you can say. You can look and you can only say this one thing. I've not had an experience where I've been consciously having a conversation with somebody and then just being pulled from your body and seeing things in that way.